Yeah,
Okay,
cool.
So I'm hitting record now.
Okay.
And again, it's mostly just you and I getting a chance to chat, and the rest of it's going to be byproduct. I got so excited when Wildstorm was purchased by DC because I thought, I loved DC of that time period, and I loved Wildstorm of that time period, and I thought that putting those two flavors together was going to be awesome. And one of my favorite customers at the time was like, "No, this is terrible. They're going to ruin Wildstorm." And I was like dubious, like, "Well, we'll see." He freaking called it because what they always do, all these companies, but DC's done it so many times. Marvel really just did Ultraverse and CrossGen, and CrossGen was going to die anyway, so it wasn't so bad. Yeah. But DC, every time they do this, they buy it and they absorb what they want into the main continuity, which is usually only the creme de la creme, and then everything else they toss in the trash. And with Wildstorm, they wanted the coloring, they wanted the artists, the talent pool. Could not have given less of a shit about the characters. Absolutely did not want to maintain that universe. Obviously, that was the diehards within the subgroup that were keeping it going as long as they did with less and less resources. As DC, well, Jim Lee's going to draw all of our shit now. Brett Booth's going to draw all of our shit now. They kept as many of the people that were high quality. Lee Bermejo. We don't want, fuck Deathblow. We want him doing Batman shit, And that's clearly what happened is that they just bought out their talent pool and the characters they could have given less of a shit about.
And it all paints Jim Lee in like a really unsavory light. Like he basically sold his kids knowing that they were going to get fucked over.
That is a weird situation too, because I've looked at that in a jaundiced light a lot. Because the thing is, the whole thing with Image was that you guys are going to go out, you're going to do creator-owned properties, you're going to show how this is done, where we're not constantly exploiting people, and you're going to show that there are viable options for shared universes, the type of stuff that most fans like outside of DC Marvel. So for him to sell out to DC was a pretty bad wound. But at the same time, I have to think that he saw the long view. He may have, we don't know how the money was at that point in time, because he clearly was spending a lot of money on high quality creatives for his line. And I understand he was just burnt out and didn't want to be...
Eventually.
Yeah, he didn't want to have all that responsibility anymore, even though he's still like a big muckety muck at DC. So it's like, well, you kind of have that responsibility. But he wanted less of the editorial responsibility, and he was watching a market in free fall, and he is a practical person, and maybe he just wanted to fucking draw Batman, It's like he was doing X-Men and perfectly happy doing that until he did the numbers on what he could make creator owned, and then he made that money, and then he's doing the numbers again and realizing I'm going to be like subsistence, living if I continue to do Wildstorm as a separate property. Let me let DC give me a cushion and my creators a cushion, and I don't have to worry about going out of business, and I don't have to be the guy who's supporting Image Comics, which is where he was at that point in time. He was the biggest chunk of the pie easily, and so he's almost like a welfare state for Image as a whole, because he's having to pay into at least a portion of his money into Image Central, so he could just sell off of DC, get a big chunk of change right off the bat, have inroads into the corporate hierarchy at DC, and continue to have his creators get paid and continue to have the properties going for at least a period of time. I given that he's gone back and done stuff with Image repeatedly over the years, he clearly still has a good relationship with most of those guys. I'm sure there were some hurt feelings and a lot of anger over it at the time because of what a grievous wound it was for Image at the time, but it also forced Image to evolve into a company that could sustain itself without Wildstorm and to have more critically acclaimed, more writer-driven works at their company. Ultimately, it was to their benefit.
And the writing was on the wall for Wildstorm. I mean, Wildcats couldn't sustain itself, and that was the biggest book.
Yeah, it was in the last month with Alan Moore. You knew he was leaving. Who replaces him? Brandon Choi. It's like, you're not keeping a lot of the Alan Moore audience with Brandon Choi. I tried, because I had gotten committed to those
Choi
characters.
Roger Cruz?
Huh? Right, exactly. It's like, I tried. I hung on for like a story arc after Alan Moore left, and obviously the magic went right out the door with him. And again, they canceled the book at 50. That tells you something. Now, clearly, Joe Casey and Sean Phillips went in there and they did something really interesting to revive that property. Well, no, I'm sorry. It was Lobdell and Travis Charest first, and then they did something interesting. But I would think that Wildstorm could have continued that route, but I didn't get to look at their books. So, the bank books. So maybe they weren't in a position to take those kind of chances before they were bought by DC. But ultimately, they still died, and there's always, I think there's some rights issues, because a lot of these properties that they just refuse to use, there's no reason why you wouldn't be using Wetworks if you had full access to them without having to pay a royalty to Wills Portacio, for instance. True. So obviously there's a lot of this stuff where they always use the Authority and the Planetary, because those are fully work for hire. So that's why those characters keep getting they're getting adapted into movies and stuff. Where anybody who's got a piece of that pie, they like a Union, nobody ever does anything with Union anymore, because probably Heisler or somebody, Tex maybe, has a piece of it, and they're not going to pay him that piece. So those characters just don't exist anymore as far as these is concerned. So it's a weird situation. As a fan, it pisses me off, but I don't know the business enough to be able to say that Jim Lee was in the wrong to do that. And a lot of people who do know the business aren't as mad as them. They were so much more angry at Rob Liefeld than they ever were at Jim Lee. And Rob Liefeld was so much less of a impact to Image and their bottom line that there had to be something to that. So I try not to judge him too much, but I do judge some. I can't help it. As a fan, I still have a lot of resentment over how that turned out ultimately.
I don't think I told you I got to hang out with Jim Lee. I was in a comic convention in Bristol with a couple of friends. One was a aspiring comic artist who's done very well in applying those skills outside of comics, and then an art dealer friend. And we got to the end of this show and everyone was packing up, and we got chatting to Jeff Smith at his table. This all sounds like Name Drop City, but I mean it's just a con story, you know.
If they were there, they were there. What are you going to say? You know, what are you going to do?
Exactly. So we're chatting to Jeff Smith at the end of the show, and my mate, the art dealer, art collector guy, goes off and is chatting to Jim Lee, because Jim Lee's a Bolland fan and my mate is Bolland's dealer now. And so they got chatting about some particular piece that Jim Lee owned or wanted, I can't remember. Then we go to the train station, my group goes to the train station. Jim Lee comes over to us at the train station. He's like, oh, do you know which train I'm getting for London? And we said, yeah, I think it's platform 7 or whatever. Turned out to be the wrong platform, so he missed his train. And then we waited in the bar for the next train and had a few drinks, and then travelled on the train back to London together as a group. So I'm in this weird position where Jim Lee's basically the guy who got me into comics. I've been into comics forever, but he got me into like American comics with X-Men 1, and then I worked backwards and forwards, you know. So I'm on the train with Jim Lee. I'm savvy enough to know not to fan out. So we're talking about stuff. We're talking about, you know, talking about Brett Booth, talking about all sorts of stuff. And the one shadow over it, but also quite a funny part of it. So it was like a 2.5 hour long train journey. Jim Lee bought all the drinks on his DC credit card, which was very nice. And then there's this one guy who just sort of glommed onto our group, and he wasn't cool, you know, and he was really pissed as well, as in drunk. UK pissed.
I figured, but good clarification now.
So yeah, he was UK pissed, and at some point he pulls out his Batman Hush hardcover. So I was saying to Jim Lee earlier on, like those DC hardcovers are pretty rubbish. Though I mean, those you know, the paper that they're using, the way they do that weird thing where they put thick paper at the front and the back, and it sort of holds the interiors weird, so you can't open the book properly. And so eventually, this guy, as we're putting into London, he pulls out his Batman hardcover and he says, you know, he's a Welsh guy, and he says, I'm going to propose to my girlfriend, and I was wondering if you'd do it for me in the form of like a sketch in my book. Yeah. And so Jim Lee draws him a Batman head, and then in the speech bubble draws a sheep because the guy's Welsh, saying like, will you marry Jeff? it was such a piss take. But as he got given the book, he was like, oh, you're right about these, they are awful. I thought, so that was quite satisfying. And then the guy got his sketch, and you could see him look down at it, and I'm sure it's in the same face like in a film where you know, it's an expression where he can't be upset. He's got something for nothing. He's got a Jim Lee sketch in his book or whatever. He's probably still got it to this day, but it's not gone exactly as planned. So yeah, that's my Jim Lee story.
Well, he probably needed to get proper pissed just to have the nerve to do that.
Yeah, and I mean, he was like slurry, leany, kind of and doing those sort of. I distinctly remember him doing like those kind of 1,000-yard stares where you couldn't tell if he was going to be sick or fall asleep or go running off to the toilet or whatever before he got up the nerve to ask. So he was long gone. Happy days. But yeah, we talked. Like, I didn't realise that the reason Brett Booth originally left comics was similar to Jeff Bridges on Savage Dragon. There was like religious reasons that took him out. I don't know what's brought him back, but yeah, he left because of being a Jehovah's Witness. I think the same as Victor Bridges.
I drew Freak Force from scraps in a cave. Yeah.
that comic really tied the room together. Oh, it's a stretch. But yeah, anyway.
Tangent.
Yes, yeah, big tangent. Superman Aliens.
can see where a Vengeance of Bane 1 could be a lot more valuable than, say, a freaking Deadpool from New Mutants 98, where they have a half me in circulation. I'm confident the Vengeance of Bane was at best half that, and probably closer to 100,000 or less. So that I can justify that price a little bit more. Although I don't know, what is it going for nowadays?
I don't know. I mean, in the UK we have fake pricing anyway. We just have people charging whatever they think they can get away with. I would defer to my comic shop for reference. So I mean, I just go on eBay, I see someone selling it for 50 quid, and then I walk away, because nobody's ever going to sell it cheaper than that, because that's what they think the cost is. You know, the price guide is irrelevant in the UK. It's if you can only find one copy, you're going to pay, and you want the book, you've got to pay for it. You know.
Yeah. I actually up and decided to buy an Overstreet hardcover because it was the Spawn one, and because it had been so long since I picked up an Overstreet, and because if I ever wanted to sell my stuff, at some point I'd like to sell some of my stuff, I didn't want to have to go through searching eBay for the prices or going through my comic shop for the price of every individual book. I wanted something where I could sit Indian style on the floor and price some books, and that's why I got the Overstreet. But I don't think that any price guide is relevant really anymore. It's when you throw it up on eBay or when it goes up on one of the main sites where you get comics, that's what it's worth, is what they can get for it.
Yeah, it's luck. I mean, so Vengeance of Bane, $100, near mint, 9.2.
So wait, so this is a slab copy and it's still only $100?
No. So it's just they used the 9.2 thing regardless. So the slabbed one, 9.8. So for trading cards fans, $350 for a 9.8.
I'm very dubious about the whole slabbing thing, especially when it deprives you of any opportunity to look and see what the book looks like on the inside, and you're basically trusting. It's like you can't crack one of those things open. I'm sure that there are ways. There are always ways. So you could swap it out, for another copy. I don't have any faith in slabbing, so I'm definitely not going to play a multiplier for this stuff.
No, and I've even seen people that are into it complaining about it and saying, I thought it was a 9.4 and it came back at an 8.9, and I'm beginning to doubt whether or not there's actually any consistency or value to all like these existential crises of people that are bought into this shell game.
Yeah. Well, and also
good luck to them.
I don't know if they have graders within the UK, but here in the States you can contest it and they'll round it back up again. You'll say no, I think it's a this, and especially I think if you're somebody who's got some pull, you can get that number come up again. So it's not immutable or anything. It's like it's not written in stone what these numbers are. So if they're not, that's why I like the Overstreet guides, because as a retailer, I would look at the spine, I'd toss through the book, I'd get a sense of what quality it was, and I would grade it realistically based on the conditions set forth. But it was still my opinion, and usually I would lowball because I'm in a suburb. I know that I cannot get full guide anyway. People are going to expect a discount on it, so I'm not even shooting for the top grade, and I'm just going to be realistic, but it's still my opinion as the person who's selling the book. And of course, this is me selling the book 20 years ago. Today, these guys just do whatever. Like, I can't stand it when I go to a shop. I'll buy a book, and they're charging me full cover or more or premium price. I get it home, the damn thing's water damaged. It's got like pages folded in. I've had coupons cut out. It's just like they don't even, it seems like unless you're getting it slabbed, nobody's even attempting to grade the books anymore. And I don't trust that the people who are slabbing it are doing their job. And I don't want to buy a book that's slabbed anyway, for starters, because it's just cumbersome. Like, have you ever flipped through some guy's box who's got a box full of slabs? It's heavy as hell, and it's clack, 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 clack. I wouldn't want to, I didn't buy it. That's just not, it's so far outside of the mentality as a reader that I just have no desire for it. There's only a few books I've considered getting slabbed, just as like Grimjack. I want to get his first appearance slabbed sometimes, because I've been a Grimjack fan for so long that if that character ever blew up because of the Russo brothers' involvement, I goddamn well want to have the best quality copy, because I was there from the beginning.
Very interesting.
But at the same time, I've never actually done it. I've never sent anything to be graded. I've never actually bought a book slabbed. So in principle, I think I want it, and yet I never actually pulled the trigger on it. So I'm basically full of shit is what I'm saying.
If I had a low grade key book that was falling, and I hate the word key, I can't believe I just used it with a straight face. But if I had a low grade, they get to me. If I had a low grade book that I loved, let me put it that way, and like if I had Detective Comics 27 and it barely had a cover, hanging on for dear life, yellow pages, that's the kind of thing that I'd consider getting slabbed. Because have you ever had that thing with a Mylar where where you try and stick a comic in, and because they're so sharp, you basically slice off the cover. Yep. Slice off like an inch of cover.
I was having Siskoid do an episode of the Marvel Superheroes podcast with me covering one of the Patsy Walker comics, and I got one of those 40 comic books, and I scanned it on my scanner so that I could send him the digital copy for him to interact with that story and produce a podcast. And just from laying it on the scanner, it cracked and broke into pieces. And so I feel kind of bad about that. And I'm sure that there's some value in those pieces, but I don't feel like comfortable cracking this thing open again. So yeah, it would be kind of nice to just put it in a thing to preserve it as something I'm not going to read again, because I wouldn't feel good about turning a page on that thing ever.
Too scared to open
it. And like you said with the Mylars, especially with the Golden Age book, the traction of trying to put it in there, you know you've only got so many times you can pull that out and put it back in again before it's going to collapse the spine, before it's going to catch on an edge and tear. It's just, the odometer is edging up on this thing, and you've only got so many shots left to touch this thing before it's just going to crumble into dust. But that's an exception to the rule. That's not fucking New Mutants 98 in a goddamn slab,
Yeah, and then it's worse when it's like, when you see comics you actually want slabbed, and you just think, this fucker's never going to be able to even read it again, and I can't get a copy. Like, I've no interest in your slabbed copy. Your slabbed copy is for you. I don't think anyone else wants a slabbed copy unless you've got some maniac who's trying to put together a run of X-Force 1 to 10 slabbed or something. Like, I just don't understand the mentality at all. And there's one of the big art dealers, I know he got big into slabbing before he had a bit of a come to Jesus moment and realised that it was completely empty and become an art dealer instead. Makes sense to me.
But at the same time, I was buying comics at a Black Friday sale, and they literally had a slab room. Like, it had a door and everything where you go into the room where it's nothing but slab keys, So it's like, there's definitely a market for that stuff. Anybody who's hauling boxes of slab books to a convention, there has to be a market, because that's a sumbitch to deal with. But that's one of my problems, and where the market's going here in the States. I don't know about the UK, but here in the States, people want to have that pristine copy that they can put on the wall and display and look at what I've got. And then the actual rest of the run goes into the dollar bins. Like, there are so many more dollar bins now than there have ever been before. And they're not quarter bins, they're still dollar bins, but like, most shops have a rather substantial dollar bin section. Or like at this Black Friday sale, they're like, oh, well, their $3 books are all 75% off, which turns them all into effectively 75-cent comic bins for the sale, at least. And then you can go in there and actually get these books that are in bags and boards, so they've been treated decent. That's one of the things I hate about dollar books. I just get tired of going through boxes of books that don't have bags, or they're clearly dusty and dirty and gross, and your fingers are disgusting and all that kind of stuff. So just knowing that I can get cheap books in bags and boards and thumb through them easily and not have it be a mess. They're actually in order, they're alphabetized. It's not just a bunch of shit thrown in the box. Find what you find. I don't have time for that anymore. My life, the minutes of my personal clock are ticking away. I don't have time to go through your unsorted box anymore, So that makes it worth it for me. But yeah, even the people who do back issues, most of the back issues would be $3 books that convert to 75% off, so 75 centers, or they're half price for the ones that aren't $3. So I'm getting $4 books for $2, $5 for $2.50, within a realm where it's reasonable for me to pick up. Because in normal circumstances that wouldn't be the case. They go in there and they maybe pull out stuff that they didn't want to sell for those prices, or they'd have a lower minimum or something like that. They want to get rid of those back issues. They just want the keys now. They just want the plastic on the shelves. They don't really want to deal with this other stuff. They've just got the floor space and the stock, and until that stock is gone, they're going to keep throwing that stuff out there. Or they're still buying collections to pull out the keys and slab those, and then throw the rest of the back issues to blow out during sale.
Yeah. I mean, you guys are, again, I see on social media the folks who go dollar diving and go to these kind of meetups, spontaneous meetups in New York or whatever, where people bring along stuff to swap, and it's all living the dream. Like, here at this point in the UK, and it only gets worse on the continent, like, nothing goes cheap anymore, because if you've got it, then you want to make some money off it, because real estate here is at more of a premium than it is in the US, and the availability of the books is lower. So yeah, constantly I find myself with friends, I'll be looking for a book that I know is something that I don't want to pay more than £1 for, but on eBay it's £2.50 £1.50 plus £2.30 postage or something. So I'm looking at paying nearly a fiver for a book that I wouldn't want to pay £1 for, but I've got nowhere else to buy it from. Whereas I see folk coming away with like full runs of amazing books for a tenner, and in the US, and think, oh God, I'd just love to spend a weekend at a show in the US just to at least see whether it feels. So here's some more Anglo-US context. When we were kids, we were envious of the fact that you had all the films first, all the video games first, all the toys first. So when I was getting Action Force figures, I was conscious that we were like 2 series behind compared to the US, and I ended up getting into this weird swapping relationship with this guy who was like a grown man. I was 15 and he was about 25 and a little bit strange. He was in the army, and he was importing stuff from the US and swapping it with me for old UK stuff so that he could swap back to the US for money. But long and short of it is there's always this kind of envy that you're at the pointy end of pop culture, whereas we're always just behind you while being just ahead of mainland Europe,
Yeah, and the one area where that would have been reversed back in the day would have been PBS running UK shows, stuff like Doctor Who and Masterpiece Theater and all that kind of stuff. But nowadays, your seasons are basically parallel to ours. It'll be on BritBox or it'll be on one of the streamers. So if we're not getting it at the same time as you, we're getting it maybe a week delay or something at most. There's no physical thing that has to go from one place to another place. So it's
no one's sending tapes.
Right. It's just not there anymore. But yeah, and I on a lark, I had taken a picture of a bunch of dollar books I got, and amongst those dollar books were a number of issues of Blue Devil, and I realized I'd bought them thinking that I still needed them, but it turned out I didn't. And one of the guys on the Discord was like, "Hey, you want to do something with those Blue Devils?" And I'm like, you don't have to pay me anything. I'll give them to you. But I didn't realize that shipping just a handful of dollar books in an envelope to Australia was going to cost me over $100. So and then as soon as I did that, one of my other friends was like, "Hey, you should be books to Australia." And I'm like, no, I am not. And I understand there might be some cheaper ways of doing that, but I don't want to seek those out. I don't have to go out to Ellington Field and ship it through the military transport or something. That's a hassle. So it's like I feel for you guys, but I'm also not putting anything in the mail because the one time I did do it, it's like, wow, okay, that was. I thought that was a lark. That was ended up being a pretty substantial investment into a lark.
Yeah. yeah. I've got a friend, a Twitter friend in the US who's currently sitting on a pile of stuff for me that I've got in the US. We've done it a couple of times before, where he's sort of stockpiled stuff and posted it over, and then I sorted him out with some Frank Quietly Missionary Man reprints and stuff that's kind of tricky to get over there. And I just found it on eBay and sent it to him. So I've got a little bit of that going on, but the shipping costs have really jacked up recently, and it's not something that either of us is in a hurry. I don't know how big his house is, but he's currently got quite a few bits of mine. He's got a Zander Cannon drawing that I had done, and a Sergio Aragonés book that I ordered, a Jim Lee trading card. It's sort of, there's a little pile somewhere in his house building up ready to post to me, and I've got nothing to offer in return at the moment, so he's getting the shitty end of the deal. But we've deviated big time. Superman. It's funny how that works with comics, no? Yeah.
Before we get back to it though, is there any creator or any key that you're just dying for if you have the opportunity and you haven't had the opportunity?
At this point, my wants list is really small. The big thing that I'm after at the moment is a copy of the Kevin O'Neill Marshal Law Graphitti editions hardcover.
Oh yeah, I've longed for that book since the 90s. I saw that solicited somewhere and I didn't have the money for it because I was too young to pay for it, and I've never seen it in the wild. I've never seen it in person my entire life.
Okay, so there we go.
So you and me both is what I'm saying.
Yeah. No, I just there's a guy who somebody in the US has came down to offer $145 down from $200, which isn't a terrible price. But then factoring in eBay's shipping, it's going to cost me another $35. So I've gone back with a counter offer, which I expect to be ignored or rejected. If he takes it, it's still going to cost me £110. But Kevin O'Neill is somebody who I'll it's got a small enough body of work that I can justify being a total completist on.
And you did get the DC collection from a few years ago, right?
Yeah, I got that. And then,
there's something about totemic about that graffiti designs one. I'm with you with that. I was just curious to make sure you had it in that form as well.
Yeah, no. You're absolutely right. And those graffiti books are like that all the way across. Sergio.
I see the Batman stuff. The late 80s, early 90s, Joker stories, Complete Aliens, greatest.
Oh, did Graphitti do those?
I
Graphitti do those?
So I think there's.
Okay.
I could be mistaken. I'm not swearing to it, but I do see some of the graffiti designs hardcovers from that time period, but never martial law.
Yeah, I mean they did Havoc and Wolverine. They did Plastic Forks. They did Electro Assassin, Martial Law.
Yeah, no, I've seen Electro Assassin before in the wild.
Yeah, and that's another like beautiful hardcover. You know, I feel like if I lost my marbles and had too much money, instead of buying Slab comics, I think I'd probably be scaring up a complete Graphitti hardcover. And I think those tepid Best of Joker, Best of Batman books, I think they were Warner books rather than Graphitti.
It may have been. I might be mistaken. You would know better than I, especially if you're that hyper focused on graffiti. I expect I would defer to you.
Yeah. Well, the annoying thing is they were before my time collecting, but now they did so many like kind of epic miniseries, like literally like the publisher Epic, not Epic in scale, but they did so many great collections. If they'd done a Last American, that probably would have been my holy grail, but it's not. So Martial Law is instead.
Did they not do a Last? No, not necessarily Graffiti, but didn't somebody do a Last American hardcover at some point?
Rebellion did a limited one just recently, and that was one I got quite lucky. I went to a show in Poland, which Mick McMahon was attending, and I mentioned that I was struggling to find one, and he said, "Oh, I'll send you one," which he did. So I got a copy from him directly, and I have to admit to opening it slightly feverishly, thinking, "I wonder," and then he hadn't. Like I thought, it'd be great to get like a little headshot or something inside, but that's just me being a greedy bastard. It's really nice to have the hardcover, but it would have been lovely to get a little doodle in it as well. But never mind. I want something for nothing, then I want something else.
Right, yeah. Oh, and you did get that martial law prose novel, right?
Yeah, I've got it here unread. Have you read it?
I started reading the first story and never finished it. It's not the same.
This thing?
No, the prose novel. The little, it's the size of a novel. Oh, is it printed in there?
Oh, okay.
Oh, it's reprinted in there. Okay, I got you.
It's called this is called The Day of the Dead.
That was the Titan collection, right?
Well, no, this is. Oh yes, so this is Titan, and it's got some really nice spot illustrations.
Yeah, I was bringing it up because as a completist, they did do a prose novel that was in the format of a paperback. It's a paperback novel, and one of the UK, the London comic shop had a stack of these things for £5 a pop. The first was the first time or second time. One of the times I was in London, they just had like a stack of them, just £5, £5, whatever you want to call it. And so I already had my own copy, so I bought copies for my friends. And I don't even remember which of the shops it was, but if you ever make it over there, they might still have them in a pile somewhere. If you don't already have that, it might be something to look into.
Yeah, because
it has a shitty CGI cover. It's like late 90s.
I know the cover. Yeah, and it's on a black background, right?
I believe so. Yeah, I think it's the martial law like pointing a gun at you or something is in the book.
So this.
Yeah, but it would have been black and white in the book though. I don't think there were any colored drawings. I think they're all black and white in the paperback version.
So I think this is either not the same thing or it preceded it. This says on the back, this all new, never before published graphic story album which sounds ridiculous, from the legendary creative team of Pat Mills and Kevin O'Neill, blah, blah,
Let me
blah.
grab it off the shelf, one sec.
Sure.
So the paperback is called Martial Law Origins. It credits Mills and O'Neill, but O'Neill just does some spot illustrations. This was published in 2008. It's a Titan Books edition. And the stories are... Okay, the introduction is Behind the Mask by Pat Mills. Where's the stories? Do they say the stories on here? I know it's 2 stories, because like I said, I started one of them. Okay, The Day of the Dead. Yeah. So you said that one has The Day of the Dead in it.
Yeah.
What year is the one you've got?
2004.
Oh, so that was the first printing then. So this is a reprinting then. Weird. Okay, so this is a prose novel reprinting of the material that was in color in your edition. So again, it comes down to just being a completist. If you wanted to have this as well, just know that it's out there. And in the middle, they've got a San Futuro map, and then you have the story Cloak of Evil.
Yeah, that San Futuro map is in the. It's at least in the Graphitti edition. There's a martial law blog if you're interested, where the guy has
I think I know what you're talking about. I've got that one bookmarked. Yeah.
Yeah, he's scanned in all the extras
Yeah.
from the hardcovers.
And then
stuff.
you got the Cloak of Evil story in that one too?
No.
No.
So I don't know what this is. Just Day of the Dead.
Okay. So there's another story called Cloak of Evil that also has spot illustrations.
Okay. All right. So that may be. I think I've seen that book on eBay again for stupid money. But if I see a cheap copy at the right price,
I'm telling you, it was $5 when I was there. You know, in the teens, the last time. Well, I don't remember if it was the first time or the second time that I went. But it was one of the shops for $5. You know, so it's like if it's stupid money, it wasn't stupid money then because they had literally 15, 20 copies, just a stack of the damn things. It was a pile. It was a pile, and I'm sure they didn't just put that out there. I bought a couple of them. I should have bought more, but I was concerned about how much space I'd have in the suitcase, and I didn't want to end up throwing one away or leaving it in the hotel room where nobody would care for it. So I didn't want to be so greedy that I deprived the next guy of the opportunity.
Yeah, I heard I heard a story about a big UK comic artist. In fact, I'll tell you. I guess it doesn't matter. You can redact it or just not use it. Okay. But it was basically he's a bit of an odd duck anyway. He's a very nice guy, but he sort of just can't understand modern life. He's like a very old world kind of guy. But he was at a show and some fans gave him their book and
now you're saying the sketchbook, right?
No, like literally like several books.
Oh, okay. Like they published
their own
stuff. Okay.
Their own comics. Yeah, because we were talking the other day on a call with some friends about like that kind of feeling guilted into buying someone's book because you're at a small show and you get chatting to someone friendly and then you're like, oh shit, now I've got to buy your book or whatever. And then his friends were saying, God, that like as a creator times that by 10 because everyone wants you to give them your thing and then you take theirs. And if you're like higher on the totem pole, then obviously their hope is that you'll somehow get their book to someone who can publish it or whatever.
I would resent that so much if I'm fucking done and somebody thinks that they're at a place where they can be making me buy them their book. It's like obviously you value the guys that don't have an ego, but at the same time it's like I'm fucking. You think I want to buy your bullshit book?
Well, this was gifting.
Oh, gifting. That's a little better.
But on the same call, a friend who was a creator was saying that he was at a show and it was dead, like totally dead. And the guy next to him was talking about his book and showing it to him. You know, it's yours, and gave it to him. And so my friend, who's a very polite guy, was like, "Oh, lovely, thanks." And he was like, "It's £25, please." And he paid it because he's too polite not to. I'd have told him to fuck off.
Right.
But on the thing, he got given his books and he got to the hotel room and stuff. And so the next day he's checking out and he's like, yes, I just leave these here or whatever. And so he's checked out the hotel. He's heading towards a taxi and then he hears Mr. And it's the guys who created those books saying, you left these in your room. What were they doing in his room that they knew? Were they going through his dustbin,
right,
his waste paper basket or something, you know?
Oh my God, yeah. That answer, that opens up a lot of uncomfortable questions there.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, so Superman Aliens 2.
Yes.
The sequel.
Take 3.
Yes. So
just to say, I think it must be like a Skype thing, but it feels like I'm stepping on you quite a bit. I don't intend to, but I think it's doing that thing where it fades out one when it thinks the other's speaking, and so my active listening is actually stepping on you.
No, that happens a lot with these kind of recordings. Don't sweat it. I feel bad when it happens when I'm doing it to you too. And yeah, sometimes it's just like one or the other of us isn't hearing, and so we're like thinking that we've got the right of way, and then we end up like side by side. So it's like not a big deal. That's what editing's for. So don't even sweat it. Sorry when I step on you though, because I know I've done that to you too.
I've not really noticed. So it's
So was there anything in particular, like, because you have a forum, is there anything that you wanted to talk about that you haven't had the opportunity to?
Rick Leonardi, Klaus Janson.
Yeah, you torture me, why don't you? Well, actually, one thing I was thinking about though is along those lines. That's I'm holding that in my back pocket for because that would be more of a long form thing. So I'm waiting to see where we go from here. So carry on.
Yeah, no, I'm fascinated. I'm fascinated by comic art in general, and the fact that the majority of, we have an awful lot of new comic readers versus years back. I listen to podcasts, look at reviews. I'm one of these people that gets incredibly irritated by the artists not getting credited, and people not realizing. For example, I don't think people would be talking about Scott Snyder so much if Greg Capullo hadn't drawn so much of his Batman. And yet, although there is some Capullo love, I feel like Snyder gets more of the attention, whereas personally, not a favourite of mine. So just kind of an example. But I am fascinated by the people that do pay attention to artists, and then the kind of the Venn diagram for where our interests lie. I've got a friend who the example he always throws out from conversations we've had is like, oh well, it's Bagleys and Bacallos, because he can't stand Chris Bacallo and he can't stand Alan Davis, and I've got no interest in Mark Bagley, and I can't remember who his other one is. But I'm just fascinated that we can be so into what we're into, and unlike film, there's not like a consensus of who the greats are, and so I'm always fascinated listening to your show, and between you and your other guests. I mean, you in particular, you're very generous to a lot of journeymen on these 80s books, and journeymen, not to be dismissive, but you're very generous to, I don't know, Pat Broderick or someone that I've no major interest in, and yet there's like this kind of pile on for Jensen to some extent, but Leonardi seems to be like you and all of your friends just have got zero time for him at all, and it makes me laugh, and I don't understand it. But yeah, the different strokes, I get it, but I see Leonardi as being along. He and Mike Zeck have got a similar kind of bounce to their figures. There's something expressive about his work that makes me think of like Michael Golden. So I just kind of don't understand the fallout there. But anyway, that's all I wanted to say to you. Not necessarily to the world. It doesn't matter that much, but makes me laugh.
No, actually, you're turning into the skid I was looking at going towards anyway, because I figured we'd end up doing some kind of an art talk anyway.
Sure.
Definitely, and I think there's a sort of a consensus opinion too, because I've been hearing a lot of X-Men related podcasts amongst the people that I'm pal around with beyond, the Rolled Spine people. And I think one of the big issues with Leonardi was that he wasn't John Romita Jr., he wasn't Mark Silvestri, he wasn't Jim Lee, and he was the guy that kept having to do fill-ins on Uncanny X-Men at a time period where those were the guys we wanted to see, and he did not look anything like them. So I think that's definitely contributory. But also, like, he was always doing stuff like Marvel Comics Presents, like the Colossus serial in that one. I think he did maybe a Cyclops one as well. He did Cloak and Dagger. He always seemed to be like a go-to guy for stuff that didn't really grab the interest of 80s kids. And I think that was something, there was a slight impressionism to him that set him apart from some of the other artists. I think that might have had something to do with it. I know that when he was inked by Terry Austin, that made a huge difference. Like, I thought that Cloak and Dagger looked great, and that was material that I was cool with. And if he had that, and he was inked by Austin, I think, on his Uncanny stuff, or maybe it was Dan Green, but it just didn't pop the same way as Cloak and Dagger did. But like Mr. Fixit is a fan of Spider-Man 2099, but that was Leonardi, and that was actually like the defining point. That's when I realized, looking at that, I was a fan of Peter David, and I'd been buying most of the stuff that he was doing in that time period, and I saw that he was announced as having Leonardi as his artist, and it was on a Spider-Man book, and I hadn't really become anti-Spider-Man yet. I definitely lost interest in the concept of Spider-Man, but I wasn't full on like, I don't want anything to do with Spider-Man stuff at that point. It was the Leonardi factor that decided for me that I was not going to pick up, and I think that was the first of the 2099 books. So that really put me off of even trying 2099 in general, because that launch book wasn't to my taste. So that's part of it. What's interesting to me, I don't know that I've ever heard of anybody not liking Alan Davis. And like, I mean, there's some people whose Alan Davis is their favorite thing ever. And I definitely love his art style. I don't necessarily buy books because he draws them. And in fact, he has this quality where there's a certain sameness to his projects. Like, I don't know, it's like everything feels like Excalibur to me when he's working on it for the most part. Every book feels like Excalibur. And that was like such a touchstone again for X-Men fans and children of the 80s. So every time I see a book and I didn't like Excalibur, and I suffered through Excalibur for a long period of time before I finally realized, why am I buying this? I don't enjoy this. And again, that's another one of those books where if you're an X-Men fan and you're wanting that Claremont angst and melodrama, Excalibur did not deliver that to you. So there's a certain, I think, being taught, like Claremont clearly likes Leonardi, Claremont clearly likes Alan Davis, but what he does with those people isn't necessarily what his fans like. And I think that's where some of that stigma comes from. But Alan Davis just objectively is a great comic artist. And I've gotten a couple of pieces from him at shows. He's never happy to see me. He never wants to draw when I'm asking him to draw. He's never particularly sunny in general, but he's still, in my mind, just an objectively great artist. And it's like, I recognize that a lot of comic art is about putting on paper emotions. And some artists are emotionally resonant and some artists aren't. Some people are just on your wavelength and some people aren't. And there are some people that I think you can look at and say, okay, your technique's bad. This is not an attractive piece of work. This is not anatomically correct. This is not a good use of perspective. There's all these things you can apply to an artist where on a technical level, they don't work for you. But if they're emotionally resonant, you look past all that stuff. You mentioned like Sam Keith earlier. I don't think Sam Keith is a very technically good artist. I don't think he's a technically good storyteller, but nobody draws like Sam Keith. And if he grabs you in the heart, you're probably going to be a Sam Keith guy for life. Like me, I just like looking at some of his work. I love some of his techniques. He was one of the coolest Wolverine artists, but I don't have like this burning desire to read the Max. I'm going to eventually, mostly because I like William Messner Loebs, who scripted a good chunk of that. And I've always enjoyed his work, but I've never felt compelled to follow Sam Keith from place to place. It was just like, he did some cool Marvel Comics Presents covers with Ghost Rider and such, but he's never been a guy I'm going to buy an artist edition for. But at the same time, I totally get why people would be into him because he offers a unique experience. Nobody draws like Sam Keith, even though he's clearly got influences. I enjoy a lot of the people that influenced him more than I enjoy him, but the particular mix of influences, that particular recipe is so unique to him that I totally get why people would buy multiple artist editions of his work.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of have the Max Artist Edition on my radar, but it goes for silly money at this point because I think similar to a weird thing during lockdown, I decided to get into fill in my gaps in Gru. I had more gaps than Gru issues, but that led to getting into Aragona's stuff, and then finding his stuff was really hard because he seems to occupy a similar place to Sam Keith, where there are people who perhaps don't buy comics anymore, but will buy anything by a given artist, and Aragones seems to have, I think the fact that people in non-English speaking countries want to buy his stuff as well means that the market's that much bigger. But just trying to find stuff on eBay of his was really tricky. And so I think Sam Keith has a similar kind of cachet, and there's a whole audience that will just love like the flair of it and the kind of variety. My issue with him is that sort of panel to panel transition where it's like, this one will be a wash just because I'm bored of inking or something, and that's what it feels like. It feels like, to me, it feels like a kind of an impatience or boredom actually drawing the comic. Like his Alien miniseries preceded all of that and looks consistently fantastic. But as time's gone along, he's just like, I'm going to paint this panel for no specific reason. And like you say, maybe he's going for like an emotional thing, but it certainly doesn't resonate with me. But back to the Alan Davis thing, like, I don't get it. I've heard complaints about his him being stuck in the 80s, and he's got hairstyles and things looking very 80s, which might sort of resonate as being very Excalibur as well. Maybe there's an overlap there. But he's fascinating to me. That step away that he did from his being inked by Paul Neary and a lot of cartooning and a lot of very young characters and sort of big heads and everything sort of Captain Britain through to that early run of Excalibur is all of a specific style. And then he goes away for a period of time to do, I think Clandestine got done in that period between Excalibur 25 or whatever it was, and when he comes back around 50. But when he comes back around 50, all of his figures are leaner, all of his layouts are a lot more kind of Neil Adams kind of inspired, a lot of long diagonal panels and things. And he's being inked by Mark Farmer, who I discovered on Keown on the Hulk, and I'm sure there's probably people that don't like Farmer on Keown but do like Rubenstein on Keown or whatever. But I loved Farmer on Keown, and Farmer on Davis was brilliant again. And then just as time went on, those guys became so like Jim Lee and Scott Williams, they were that kind of power couple of comic art. And I don't get how someone doesn't like it. And each to their own. But it is a baffling one that we really need to hammer out over a few beers sometime.
Yeah, I definitely love like Neary over Alan Davis is great, no problems there. I'm not a huge Neary guy, but I think he's good over Alan Davis. But Mark Farmer, I agree, took him to a different level, and I'm so sorry those guys don't work together anymore, because I don't think he's ever going to be as good as he was with Mark Farmer inking him. There's some guys where inking has gotten to be a thing where I feel bad, because most of these guys, they're having to ink convention sketches now, or they're having to take up the pencil themselves, and some of them are stronger than others when it comes to that sort of thing. Like a Joe Rubenstein, he can draw whatever you need him to draw. It'll be great. But there are some of the other guys where it's just like, without something to ink, they don't really have anything to carry them, and I feel really bad for those guys. And I'm glad I've got a piece that I'm looking forward to moving around in the coming years. That'll be an inker showcase, thankfully. But yeah, like everything I've gotten from Alan Davis, he's inked himself, and it would be great to have some of that stuff in pencil and take it to Mark Farmer and have him ink it, because it looks so great. I do agree that when you bring out that Neal Adams quality, which I don't see as much, like I know it's there, it's always been there underlying. His whole storytelling is Neal Adams, but in terms of his style and the detailing, it's much more apparent after he's working with Mark Farmer than before. And that's actually my favorite Brian Hitch, was when Brian Hitch was doing his best Alan Davis impersonation. Like Hitch to modern Hitch, the Authority Onward guy, the Stormwatch guy Onward guy, that guy's fine. I like that guy okay. But my sweet spot is like Mystech Wars. My sweet spot is like Death's Head, that like the early Marvel UK stuff, or even the second generation Marvel UK stuff, when he was the best Alan Davis with that extra image detailing that made him of the 90s, where Alan Davis himself never quite got there. Even when they had him working at Wildstorm, he did a lot of stuff for Wildstorm in the late 90s, and he's great at doing like Gen 13 and stuff like that, but he still was an 80s guy doing 90s characters. He never quite made it to the 90s. He's a great artist. I never would take that away from him. I would say he's objectively a better artist, better storyteller than Brian Hitch, but I've never enjoyed Alan Davis as much as when Brian Hitch was trying to be Alan Davis.
Funny. I can see that. I mean, I've got a big Davis chunk on my shelf, and I can't explain. I'd be interested to talk to him about it. I've heard him say that Adams isn't such a big influence on him, but that whether it's Clandestine, which I've not taken off the shelf for a long time because it's like, to my mind, it's just not actually very good. It's fine. I bought it at the time in issues, but not a massive fan. But there's clearly, like, I almost wonder if he wasn't looking around at the Silvestris and the Jim Lees and thinking, I need to change this up a little bit. So his women got several heads taller. Like there was a big change in the way he drew and the way he laid out pages, and it all lent kind of Neal Adamsy to my mind in terms of page design. If you go back to like X-Men annuals and things like that, you're looking at a lot of panels on the page, a lot of like really intricate detail on small drawings, and then that all changes at that point in about 92, 93 or whatever. But yeah, in terms of Excalibur, I got the Jim Lee. My introduction to a lot of those characters was on the Jim Lee trading cards, where I was like, who the hell are these guys? Like, who's Widget? What's a Kylan? I really didn't care at all. And I didn't get to those comics until quite a bit later. And that was just for the Alan Davis art. That's when he was writing himself, and they weren't great comics. They weren't funny, which was kind of the point of it. So if you're not funny and you're supposed to be funny, what else have you got to offer? Pretty pictures.
Well, I mean, again, that was part of those wilderness years of Chris Claremont. And so, like, Longshot was such a great miniseries. So Claremont's like, yes, I want to play with that stuff too. So he brings Longshot and all that stuff in. And what comes of that? We get Mojo as an X-Men villain. But really, the stuff that Claremont did with that property was never as good as the original miniseries. And likewise, Excalibur was Chris Claremont reading all that Alan Moore material and trying to do that kind of stuff for himself and not in any way living up to it. So you see all these things that you're familiar with from the Marvel UK books, but they're not doing anything remotely interesting, and they're not speaking to the American audience. I don't think they're speaking to the British audience. It was just this half measure of him trying to do something that he wasn't able to do because he was impressed with what somebody else had done. And unfortunately, instead of getting 50 some odd issues of Alan Davis on Marvel Man or on Captain Britain, we got it on Excalibur, the worst place it could have been. But I 100% guarantee you that you are not alone with the X-Men trading cards. I had the same experience. I know plenty of other kids had the same experience. Excalibur was absolutely the one that was only there there for the hardest of hardcore X-Men guys, or the people who just loved Alan Davis. And I agree with you. I mean, we were both implying it, but you finally outright said it, is that he was trying to chase that image look, but he was too essentially Neil Adams. And when you talked about Mark Bagley earlier, what I think is interesting about Bagley, I really enjoyed his work on like New Warriors, the early stuff. And I didn't buy the book, but I liked looking at it. I liked the way he designed those characters. He's really good at drawing those teen heroes and such. And then he made the move to Spider-Man, and he had such a strong John Romita Sr. influence. And I respected that. I liked it fine. But I just wasn't that interested in Spider-Man as a concept by the time he was coming on. But also, all I could see was, I wish John Romita Sr. were drawing this instead of this kid. You know, I wish this kid would go back and do New Warriors where he's doing something interesting instead of reheating Jazzy Johnny, right? And I think that part of why Bagley was able to be so successful in the 90s, because all the Image guys left, so he wasn't competing directly with, you know, McFarlane and Larson and all those other kind of guys. And so he gave him a lane. And also I think that there were Bronze Age revivalists who hated that period look and wanted something more retro. But I think maybe the key, and again, great storytelling. He's really good. He's got all the basic chops. He's got everything you need for good solid comic book art, right? Yeah. But also he didn't look like Neil Adams. And I think that was part of Alan Davis's problem, is that Neil Adams had so thoroughly saturated the market with guys who looked like Neil Adams. Me as a guy who grew up on Neil Adams and loved his art style, even I was kind of tired of looking at Neil Adams-y people by the 90s because he'd cornered the market and saturated the market, where there weren't that many John Romita guys. Even John Romita Jr. doesn't really draw that much like his dad, right? He came up with his own thing, especially when he started working with Klaus Johnson. Totally looked different from his dad by that point. And so, Bagley found a lane by looking like John Romita when people were not drawing like John Romita anymore. And that, I think that was Alan Davis's essential problem. And it's something that the Image guys all owed a debt to Neil Adams, but I think they all kind of grabbed more firmly onto the George Perez and John Byrne influences, and then later on the Arthur Adams influences, to pull themselves away from that Neil Adams quality that Alan Davis could never fully shed because it was just so integral to his artwork, regardless of whether or not he owns up to it. It's there. We talked about this previously. There's the people that you love, that you admire, that you aim to be like, but there's also those people that are just wired into your DNA, and whether you're conscious of it or not, it's just there. And that Neil Adamsness is just inherent in Alan Davis's work. It's just he can deny it, but I don't see how he can, because I see it on the page. Now he's different enough where he definitely doesn't look like he comes out of Continuity Studios or anything, but just the basics of how he tells a story, the way, the architecture of his figures, it's all Neil Adams.
Yeah. I mean, he says in the thing about him saying, I've read an interview where he challenged Neil Adams thing a little bit, bearing in mind that he's actually done in Clandestine. He did a page which was like that Neil Adams Dead Man thing, where there's like a head, but it's made up of like a graveyard in one panel and a van driving down the road in the second panel, you know, and individual panels are different things, but when you sort of pull the page back a little bit, you can see there's a big face in it. And he actually did a page like that, which was that was Neil Adams' big thing on Dead Man, and I think he did it on like Ben Casey as well, just Neil Adams playing around. And so Davis has actually incorporated these kind of sort of tributes to Neil Adams in his work as well. But in Justice League The Nail, there's an outro, and he says like, my Batman is Don Newton, I think he said. No, my Batman is Jim Aparo. And it's like, it's not though, is it? I mean, it's Neil Adams. So yeah, I don't know. There's definitely something. I can see why people are defensive about owning like such a major influence. And we did talk about this before with Miller and Dick, I think. But yeah, I've got no issue with it, and it brings something amazing to the table. I do think that if you look at the last few things that Davis did, even with Farmer, like the Avengers story with Al Ewing, it was like a 3-parter, and the Jim Starlin Infinity trilogy hardcover things that he did. He's naturally kind of evolved as well, almost like devolved. There's a lot more shapes and a lot less rendering. So for me, Davis isn't really drawing anymore anyway, but the last thing that he did was last thing I think that he did was like a 2-part Conan story that was inked by Robin Riggs, I think. And and yeah, you sort of miss Farmer on that. But I think Davis was already going down a slightly different path to what Farmer was really lending his magic to anyway.
Well, I love Robin Riggs also, so I have to point that out there too. Is like there's some artists where they just up the game also. So no flies on Robin Riggs. And I've actually
based on what I've only seen him ink like an issue of Davis on Avengers, and then these two Conans. I think he won the same way as Bagley won that Marvel tryout. I think Robin Riggs won, and I find that a difficult name to actually say, so I might end up saying Robin Riggs like Jonathan Ross. Yeah, he won the tryout for lettering and ended up becoming an inker. So I'm curious, what are you just going back to like Marvel UK stuff or something? What's your
quite a competition between outmoded, no longer valued skills in this industry?
Lettering or inking, you decide.
One went out a little quicker than the other one, but they're both pretty much gone now. Robin Riggs had a long run on Green Arrow, and in particular was inking Rodolfo DiMaggio when he was doing the book. And
no. That was somebody with a Spanish name. That was like Campanella.
Okay, well, Robin Riggs did have a run on it wasn't Rodolfo DiMaggio. It was Dougie Braithwaite.
That makes sense.
And that was, and I've never like when Dougie would do the grayscale, that was probably his best work, but I really like that clean line that Robin Riggs gave, and I've never enjoyed Braithwaite's work as much as I did when Riggs was inking him. So that's where that comes from. And I really liked I didn't buy, I hate to say it, as much of a Starlin stan as I've been over the years, but I did not pick up any of that Thanos stuff, the Latter Day stuff. I've not heard great things about it. And I just don't care anymore. Like I enjoyed, he started that Thanos ongoing series that Keith Giffen ended up finishing. And I very much prefer the Giffen stuff over the Starlin stuff, even though Starlin was drawing the stuff that he was writing. But I as a writer, I just don't really respond well to Starlin anymore. I kind of miss the drugs, to be honest.
Yeah.
That's part of it. But I remember seeing that run of Avengers Big Three stuff that Alan Davis was doing, and it looked fantastic. It's funny you mentioning the Jim Aparo thing, because again, that's like somebody saying that they have a big Brian Hitch influence and not acknowledging Alan Davis. How do you say, oh yeah, my Batman's Jim Aparo, but Jim Aparo's Batman is Neil Adams, And the whole thing about it, he was shooting for Neil Adams. He was doing his best to be Neil Adams when Neil Adams wasn't being Neil Adams. And part of it was he just had a cleaner, more cartoony approach to the same basic kind of storytelling. I agree. My favorite Batman is Jim Aparo. I love that work. And actually, it makes sense because I can see the Aparo in Brian Hitch, and striving for that look is what separates him from Neil Adams to a large degree, because again, it's a more cartoony style, but the fundamentals are still there, The storytelling approach is different, and he has a broader quality. I think Aparo plays the back seats even more, where I think there's a certain restraint to Neil Adams where there's a restraint of realism, and also he always wants everybody to be model beautiful, and Aparo is willing to get more of a caricature, a little bit bigger with it, a little bit more of a debt to the comic strips as opposed to comic books. It's still the same bloodline, It might be a distant cousin, but it's still the same bloodline. So what are you talking about?
Yeah, I've seen Michel Fife try to. I think he attempted like a map of detailed versus cartoony in quotation marks, and like he tried to do like a 4-quadrant map of styles and place different creators on there based impressionistic versus realistic, and then detailed versus cartoony or something like that. And I've been tempted to think about such a thing myself. And yeah, there's like Neil Adams you think of as realistic, but there's also like that kind of gurning, like when he does people emoting, like their lips all sticking out all over the place and kind of gurning at the camera, and that's always a weird thing to see, and that's the weird thing to see when someone else is trying to do Neil Adams and they try and do that, because it's not the best quality of Neil Adams work. So it's funny to me that people would impersonate it. But on the Hitch thing, like you were saying about the authority onwards, clearly all that happened to Hitch was at some point he discovered discovered Nolan, probably around the same time as Adam Hughes did, and they both switched. I mean, Adam Hughes is on another level himself, but they both switched to Nolan rendering, like double lighting, sort of cross-hatching. If you look at that, there's a trade paperback of Stormwatch where Hitch has used the guy from the black guy from one of those Star Trek things, Deep Space Nine, or one of them.
Avery Brooks.
What's that? Sorry?
Avery Brooks.
Yeah. Okay. So that's who he's used as like battalion. But that cover is inked by Nolan, and that is a signpost for everything that Hitch does afterwards. It's like he got the inks back from that cover and went, "Oh, I'm doing that from now on." And that's when he managed to break out of his Alan Davis mold. Was when he just overlaid Kevin Nolan into his style.
Yeah, and that's one of the things. That's why I love Kevin Nolan so much. Is that there are so many artists that are so indebted to him, but literally nobody can draw like Kevin Nolan. They can try to. That influence can be present. I appreciate that a lot of people. But some of my favorite stuff about Jim Lee is the stuff he stole from Kevin Nolan, right? But nobody ever can pull it off because there's just something essential about how Kevin Nolan draws. I've never seen anybody be able to effectively swipe any elements of his style. Like in technique, sure, you can see influence, but nobody draws quite like him. Nobody can ever quite get into the same headspace, it seems like it. And like Hitch, he does that stuff that when Nolan's doing kind of a rougher quality, right? Like that more sketchy quality to it. And that's not necessarily my favorite Nolan. It's not necessarily not. I like that stuff in some respects, particularly like his earlier work, that it has a naivete to it that I like, and it has that 80s quality to it that I appreciate, but it's not what I necessarily want from Nolan today. It's not necessarily the parts that he's good at doing today. And it feels like that's like one of the points at which his development, it's a you can see that place in his development, but he progressed past that. So it's weird for me to see people take from an earlier evolution of Nolan and make their whole style about, trying to do that version of Kevin Nolan. Arguably Mike Mignola was for a while they were trying to do Kevin Nolan. And of course he found himself and did a different thing, but that influence is still clearly there. I don't know where else.
Yeah, I think Mignola's an interesting one because he learned so much. He clearly learned so much from his collaborations with P. Greg Russell, Al Williamson, Kevin Nolan, and it all seemed to come at a time when he was open to it, and then just really locked down into inking his own work or whatever, and then just became his own unique thing. There's a later BPRD. There was a little run of BPRD covers that Kevin Nolan inked, and they look the worse for it. They look like they don't look like it's not like the Alien Salvation. It's not a great hybrid of two styles. It really is neither nor. Whereas Alien Salvation, I think, although Mignola says he wanted Nolan to go mad and turn it into Nolan the way that you might expect him to, I think it hits a really nice sweet spot between both of their styles. But then Mignola does the thing similar to what you're describing with Nolan. Mignola does the thing where he does the first Hellboy, the second Hellboy, the third Hellboy. A lot of people jump on board and start trying to ape that style, and then he just keeps moving and nobody can keep up with him. So there's like a whole period of artists who are really locked into imitating certain marks that Mignola made in about 1993 that he's long since moved past. But people look at it now and go, oh, they're doing a Mignola style. It's like, yeah, they're doing a Mignola 1993 style. Nobody's imitating Hellboy in Hell because you can't, because you're not in his head. And I think that's the same with Nolan. It's like, okay, I'm going to do all this double lighting and all this cross-hatching to make it look like Nolan. And whereas Nolan will go, yeah, I'm not doing that on this panel. I'm going to do some cartoony thing like Bob Hoskner or something, and then and confuse everybody, but it will look amazing. And I think that's the thing that people are missing. They're missing the soul of Nolan because Nolan is Nolan. Yeah,
and you can see them doing the same thing in such different, incompatible ways. Again, like you're talking about with Sacrifice, where Nolan will find that spot where it's spare, and then he'll just put all this tiny little cross-hatching in there and really like turn the shadow into one thing. And then Mignola is just going to go in there and do like a solid and with no cross-hatching or just a few slashes. Yeah. And those two things are not compatible. They're doing sort of the same thing, but the approaches are so different to doing that thing that, again, this is left and this is right, and you can't really meet in the middle. And like you said, you that's part of the construction. Like you can see where Nolan influenced Mignola, and Mignola went in one direction, and then Nolan's style is developed as well. And unless you can build build to that, unless you're going on that same arch, you're never going to be able to quite replicate that. Let me stop me right there. This could go on for almost another hour. Let's stop now. Too much. Enough. Let me give thanks to Adam Michael Smith, ASI Game, Between the Pages blog, our own Billy Hynes, Comics Enabler, Captain Entropy, who wrote, "You're deliberately intriguing us with weird, cryptic topic descriptions." Good Scraps Frank, odd but oddly entertaining. Chris Dunford, DC Dave, the Dead End Kid, who wrote, "These clip episodes are always fun. The lads are right. This pod is all y'all, and nobody in your crew is the straight man. Chill. Also, my husband is absolutely frickin' horrified by the talk of Oculus Ghani. Excellent work, fellas." Derek WC, Dums Svigil, Dwight L. McPherson, Eugene R. Hendricks, voice actor, home studio, Gas, History of Comics on Film, The Irredeemable Shag, Jean-Bernard Francois, JMD Productions, Julie Raoul, Keith G. Baker, King Dinosaur, Masks Don't Lie, Moody Machan, Pamela Goose, Peruo Kishido, something like that. Relatively Geeky Podcast Network, Richard Field, Superbound, Teal Productions, TNTM The Show, Twins Are Rising, and Writin' Fighting Game with Rollback. Running down a dream that never would come to me, working on a mystery, going wherever it leads, running down a dream.